y'all, welcome back. If you are new here, my name is Morgan and I do all things spooky here, but for this month and maybe a little bit after, I am doing nothing but coming on here every day and reading scary stories that you guys have sent to me. I've had something spooky happen in several of these videos that I've been filming. Something happened in the last one I just filmed, so fingers crossed it doesn't happen in this one. But if you have any stories to send me, please check out the description below. You will find where to send those and like what to do so we make sure that I see them. And also my social medias are there, so please check that out. And without further ado, let's get into these stories. These stories took place in the home my family lived in when I was a newborn. I'm sending these in mainly because I'm curious to know what you think could have been scaring my parents. So for some background, my family lived in this home for the duration of my mother's pregnancy with me. I'm not sure how long before that they lived there. My mother's mom, Grandma D, we'll call her, has always been tied to paranormal things. She loved that stuff and always seemed attached to spirits and the otherworldly. Whenever she'd visit the home, she'd say things about how the house had entities in it, spirits. That's important for later. To start, my mother's pregnancy with me was incredibly weird. There were multiple times when they weren't sure of my life either. No showing up on screens, no heartbeat, or just no activity in general. I'd make my mother incredibly sick, more so than with her first pregnancy. And that was the pregnancy that she'd had before living in that house. Funny thing, my due date was also supposed to be 6/6/06. After I was born, activity seemed increased. My mother would avoid using the bathroom in her room because she felt nothing right in there. The energy would always be off. They'd also hear scratching in the walls and ceiling, but only from my mother's son's room. When they had someone come over to investigate, since they thought it might have been rats, they found absolutely nothing, not even a single trace of anyone having been in those places. Grandma D once again said an entity was there. On a few occasions, my parents would enter the room to find little infant me sitting in the corner of their room, looking at the ceiling, giggling and babbling at whatever was there. They rumored that maybe I was seeing my dad's grandparents, but I'm not sure. But if there's one specific instance that really freaked my mother out, it's this one. One day it was just me and her. She was in the living room minding her business and feeding me. Out of nowhere, loud sounds of crashing and banging erupted from the garage. It sounded like things were being tossed around. She got up and went to investigate, but when she opened the door to the garage, the sound stopped. Strangest part? Nothing was moved. Everything was where it was. Seeing that nothing was out of the sort, my mother turned to go back to the living room, but before she could start walking, a dark shadow dashed across the floor in front of her. My family finally moved out not long after that. We've always lived in Oregon, and this took place in Forest Grove, I believe. The house was pretty old. I don't know what's been done with it in the past 19 years, and I'm no longer in contact with my mother. My grandmother loved that house, though. Things seemed to mellow out whenever she was there. What do you think? I think that whatever it was didn't follow us after we moved, but every once in a while, especially whenever I was at my mother's home, I'd get incredibly paranoid and even hallucinate. I would see this weird figure in the corner of my room when I did. Bone, skinny, naked, pale, long limbs, no face. Even with no eyes on it, I'd feel like it was staring. I'd hear things too, like voices in my home, even though I was alone. Like Grandma D, I'm sensitive to that stuff. Might have been tied to bad mental health at the time. But even now, sometimes my instincts go incredibly haywire and a sense of impending doom takes over like before. Anyways, I hope you enjoy. Let me know if you have any ideas on what could have been happening here and if I should do any rituals just in case. My dad's apartment periodically gets bouts of bad energy in the air, even when we move to another place. A couple of things I didn't mention because I had completely blocked them out until now. In that apartment my dad and I used to live in before we moved to our current one a couple years ago, during one particular time of bad energy in the home, my room had the most sickening feeling. I recalled one night laying in bed on my side scrolling on my phone when suddenly it looked as if an entire hand, pitch black, appeared out of the corner of my eye, as if it was about to touch my face. I've had past experiences seeing shadow figures before, but nothing like this. Nothing so vivid, nothing so close. One more thing. Whenever that thing would appear in my mother's house, it was always followed by a horrible smell, like wood being burned. It sometimes happens at my dad's old apartment, but significantly less. I don't see it anymore, nor do I hear things that aren't there. I have a feeling it's due to the town we used to live in, another one, not Forest Grove, being associated with some of the worst times of abuse, and finally leaving made all of that go away. We still occasionally sage the new apartment just in case. Anyways, I just thought I'd include some of these missed details since I don't know what could or could not be a result of living in that house. Okay, so let's chat about that. So you mentioned no contact and abuse and things like that. So I am thinking some of this, not all of it, so hear me out. Some of this may be a manifestation of just that negative energy. I don't know if the abuse happened with your mom or like anything. You did say you're no contact with your mom. I'm thinking maybe, because it happened really bad in your mom's house, right? There was just really negative energy there and it formed into its own being. But the way you described that thing, it could be several things. But the bad smell with it makes me feel like it's definitely a negative presence that was brought there by the bad energy. If you're not really dealing with it now, I would just keep up with cleansings. It probably stayed where it needed to be, but that's creepy. That's really creepy. I would say it was like brought there by the negative energy though, but at least it didn't follow you, so that's good. And if you said you're in tune with that side, you would definitely know if it did. So keep up cleansings and just keep your eye out just to make sure. All right, next story. This happened when I was around 11, walking through the woods when I heard whistling and my name being shouted. I whistled back stupidly, unknowing as a child of the rules and the whistling, and the name calling continued. It sounded like my friend I'd recently been with. I would continue to shout and whistle back, and then I heard something that I'd never heard. It kind of sounded like growling, but in a voice. I could see nothing at all, but the voice is close. It's also far. I've never ran so fast in my whole life. I've been back around, but I won't go at night. Still terrified to this day. Do you have any idea what this could be? I'm very spiritual, believe in everything. Sounds like just one of the things that lives in the woods. Try not to whistle back or acknowledge them at all. Definitely don't taunt them or anything, and they'll usually leave you alone as long as you pretend you didn't hear or see them. All right, next story. So this story happens to be about a close friend of mine. She's been experiencing paranormal events for over a year now, and we aren't superstitious, more skeptic-like, but I can't ignore this. For context, whatever this is has been tapping on my window, slamming doors, causing all sorts of noises. Okay, on to the actual event. I was on a Zoom call with him, and we were waiting for a few others to join so we could play a game together. I'd already heard about these weird events, and although I'm not very superstitious, I believed him. Anyways, we're on this call, and suddenly he shushes me and says, "Do you hear that?" Light tapping ensued coming from his window. Another thing to mention is that it only taps when his brothers aren't around, only when he's alone. Anyways, I tell him to point his camera at the window. I was going to see this creature. Well, what happened was he went to point the camera and take a picture, but his phone started malfunctioning. He dropped his phone and locked eyes with the thing outside. From what he described, it was a pale white face, beady eyes, and it disappeared right after. The tapping stopped for a bit, but throughout the night it kept doing it, and after that my friend refused to be alone in there. I stopped hearing about it after a while, but when I saw your post about asking for stories, I knew I had to ask if it was still happening. He said yes. Whatever this thing is still following him around. Is there any advice? It's toned down a bit, but hasn't stopped. So that sounds like a walker, and they don't really handle being perceived very well. Same. So whenever you acknowledge them, especially head on with the eye contact, they're going to take a huge interest and just kind of stick with you. I would do banishments, cleansing, set up protections, and tell him, to ignore literally every single sound. It's going to take a while, but eventually, if you just act so uninterested in the situations and you have all these protections set up, it will eventually go away. But, I would definitely recommend doing that, or it won't stop, and it'll get worse until bad things happen. So that's my advice. All right, next story. A story you recently read reminded me of this. A lot of these things could be individually anything, but it was just weird that they all happened around the same time. Also, I apologize if this is written terribly. I was trying to keep it on the shorter side, and I'm not a very good storyteller. You guys are fine. Tell me the longest stories. It is literally fine. I had a very active imagination as a child, but Tommy and Sally were two things that I always imagined in different ways. When I played with imaginary friends, at least. I could only really imagine the general outline of a person. All the details, like a face, would be fuzzy. I would have to try really hard to keep them one, and I would immediately forget what face I gave them. I never had to try to imagine Sally. She was just there, truly detailed the same way every time. Tommy, however, I tried to put a form to and never could. I'd been playing with dolls one day when a little girl sat down and started playing with me. She called herself Sally, and I knew she wasn't really here in a physical sense. Sally was always around and just wanted a friend. Everyone called her an imaginary friend, so I just always assumed that I'd made her up. It was just very odd that she wasn't like any of the other people that I imagined. Tommy was not a friend. I distinctly remember him having a tea party with Sally and 3 other nameless imaginary friends. I got this feeling of being watched. Sally said, "Tommy's here. I have to leave. He'll be mad." I remember trying to bring Sally back because I was freaked out, but I couldn't. So I cleared up the tea party stuff. I had on this really dark feeling that just settled into the room. That feeling was what Tommy was, and after that point, weird things would happen around the house. I would never sleep well and would frequently get up in the middle of the night. There was an office right across the hall from the bathroom. Our family computer was in there, and we kept the door closed at night to keep the cat out of it. Anywhere between midnight and 4 a.m., I'd always hear sounds coming from that room. Usually it was just the sound of someone typing on the keyboard, but sometimes it sounded like someone was messing with the CD cases in there too. I would go in there a few times thinking that maybe the cat had gotten in there. That sound would stop as soon as I opened the door, and the room would always be empty, so I learned to ignore it. I started having nightmares almost every night. I had 3 repeating dreams that occurred. One of these repeating dreams would happen seemingly at random. I would leave my room to find something large taking up most of the hall. I couldn't go past it, and for some reason it scared me. I could never remember what it looked like other than a tall, wide humanoid shape, though. The other 2 were about kids going missing and aliens for some reason. They would go missing in my room, only to turn up in a spot I'd already searched. I had a handful of toys or other items that would make noise, and they would sometimes randomly go off in the middle of the night. These items would include a Furby with no batteries, but those things sounded awful at a low battery level. A baby doll that had sat up in my bin in the closet for 3 years that would sometimes make noise too. For my birthday, 2 years before all this started, I've been given a porcelain doll that had a winding key in its back. She played Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and had only ever been wound up once. Every so often, I would come home from school and enter my room, and she'd play exactly 3 notes. I would open and close that door a lot. I lived in my room with the door closed. It only happened when I would come home for some reason. One day I saw a bright flash followed by the sound of a mechanical winding, like a camera. It freaked me out enough that I told my dad since there had been a window right behind me. He looked all around the house but found nothing. I later found an old camera I forgot about in the shelf that had been across from me. It had no batteries or film though. I learned to deal with all these things a little over time and to ignore Tommy when he darkened my room. Eventually I stopped seeing Sally too, until we were about to move. The night before moving, I had my first sleep paralysis episode. I was facing the wall and it felt like someone was standing behind me. They felt the same as Tommy did. They told me I was going to hell, amongst other things. I was very glad to leave that house a few hours later. At the new house, I had a room in the basement. It was plenty big and I could decorate it however I wanted. I couldn't sleep there though. I would have trouble falling asleep and had awful nightmares that would wake me up. I was so tired and sluggish that a good portion of the first few weeks in that house was a blur. I had one last nightmare though. In this nightmare, Sally was standing at the top of the stairs in the kitchen. I was at the bottom. I don't fully remember what she said, but I remember suddenly thinking, well, that's not Sally. This Sally starts slowly coming down the stairs, and I realized that she had one of the chef's knives from the wood block on her counter. I woke up when she got about halfway down. Before we left the house that morning, I could swear I saw a black smoky skull in the far right point of the basement. Fortunately, this was probably just a hallucination. My parents had gotten an HVAC company to come in and check out the furnace before we turned it on for winter. Their little meter detected gas leaks went off before they even made it to the stairs. I ended up being really lucky because I like candles and incense. Someone had given me an electric candle wax warmer when I moved in, so I'd never lit any of the candles or incense while I was down there. Jesus. So yeah, I really don't know if Sally or Tommy ever existed, or if I was having some extended mental breakdown, or what was going on. Sally and Tommy never showed up again after that. I guess this is also a PSA to check for gas leaks when you move to new places. Please always check for gas leaks. Oh my god. The fact that if whoever gifted you that candle warmer didn't, to be quite honest, I think they were both real. I think Tommy may have been more a manifestation of negative energy. I don't think, because you couldn't see details, I don't think he was an entity that locked down like features. I think it was a manifestation of bad energy. But Sally, I do think, was just a little girl that was there, and she did not like Tommy's vibes. And you know what? I'm not there. I'm just reading this story, and I don't like Tommy's vibes, so I get it. I get her. Let's read the next story. For context, I live in a state park on a very old ranch house with a massive yard that backs up to the woods. The previous owners of this house was a man who built the home by hand. He was said to be a strange man. Keep in mind, he built a reindeer yard decorated by hand and adored it. One day, my mom and stepdad were sitting on the porch. Our dog Loki doesn't have a leash or fence to keep him in the yard. He's never run or chased animals, but on this day, everything changed. It was late at night, and the only light source being a small lantern on the porch table. Suddenly, a smallish creature with glowing red eyes catches my stepdad's eye. He immediately calls for Loki, but before my stepdad can get his attention, Loki bolts off. He runs in the direction of that creature. It took about an hour to find Loki, and he was almost a mile away. When my stepdad approached Loki, he was really timid, panting and swaying in a low growl. My stepdad got closer to him, and he had a mark on his side. It was a rather deep scratch in the shape of an X. Loki got carried home and got his cut treated. Ever since he was brought home, there's been an eerie and heavy feeling throughout this entire house. Loki hasn't been the same since he returned from his run-off. The negative presence is the heaviest in the living room. My mom and stepdad are feeling very scared and weren't sure what to do. I suggest sage and ringing a bell because you have recommended it before. We all stood in the living room ringing bells, saging and praying. Almost immediately, a fragile glass ornament flew off the Christmas tree, and it shattered on impact to my forehead. It left small cuts and gashes. After that, there was an incredibly clear "get out" in a man's voice. My dad kept praying. His fear was incredibly visible. The next day, we spent more time outside because being in the house left us so nauseous and weak. We sat in the carport near the handmade reindeer and previous owner had made. My mom made a comment about how weird it is and said, "It's such junk." The next morning, my mother woke up and went outside to let Loki out and drink her coffee. Distant at the end of our yard, the reindeer was placed facing the part of the woods where Loki ran off. My mom woke up my dad and asked him if he'd put it there, and he said no. My mom was afraid to touch the reindeer, understandably. My mom turned around to put Loki inside so that he wouldn't run off again. When my mom turns around, the reindeer is gone. Things are still happening to this day, and they seem to be getting worse. There are noises, pounding footsteps down our long hallway, etc. It feels like something is always waiting for you at the end of the hallway. The priest is coming to bless the home soon. I'll be staying at my grandma's until then. Thoughts on what we're dealing with? So to me, it sounds like that little animal you saw with red eyes wasn't a little animal at all, something pretending to be that lives in the woods. So the protocol to ward off those things and deal with them is a bit different than just cleansing your space. I would recommend doing, obviously, a little cleansing of your space, but on top of that, you need to put up wards or protection. So you said a priest was coming to bless your house. Do that. If that will help. You just need to do whatever you have to do, whatever is centered around your beliefs or your faith. So if you're a Christian or anything like that, a priest will help. It's literally just whatever you can throw your full faith and belief into will work, because you're putting all of that energy behind it. So let me know what happens after the priest comes, and if we need more assistance after that, I will tell you what I would do. Alright, I think we got time to read one more story. I've always been fascinated by the spooky and macabre, but keep it at arm's length in my daily life because I get easily spooked. Honestly, don't know if this story is paranormal, but it happened almost a year ago and I cannot stop thinking about it. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. It takes place in a 19th century English cemetery known for its catacombs, sandstone caves, and paupers' graves. And a lot also sits on the land where public executions used to take place, just for some historical context. After months of driving past the cemetery and feeling and ignoring its weird pull, I decided to finally have a wonder to just explore the area. I went in during the day, and it's right off a busy road, so I felt safe and pretty calm walking in. I'm always respectful and intentional when visiting a cemetery, but this time I didn't bring an offering to leave at the gate, which in hindsight, maybe I should have done. I learned the hard way about that. We'll get into it. Anyways, as soon as I walk through the gate, the noise of the very loud road fades to practically nothing, which I definitely took notice of. There aren't many trees or shrubs that could act as a buffer. I keep walking through, reading headstones and just following the paths, and I see 2 other people walking through, but they're far away, and other than that, I'm completely alone. The cemetery is kind of tiered, so the path I walked along starts to go down toward a dead end, and there are rows of graves above me on the left-hand side, so I can't see very far that way. Along the right-hand side in front of me is the very tall, sturdy brick wall that surrounds the cemetery. Out of nowhere, a huge muscular Doberman appears and is sticking its head between the graves above me on the left. I didn't hear any running or footsteps or barking or anything that would suggest a dog was nearby. We lock eyes and he's breathing heavily. I don't feel scared. I start looking around him to see if its owner is there, but again I can't really see around me at all. I'm just standing still, not sure whether to turn my back or stand my ground. This dog jumps down from the left and is now standing directly in front of me about 50 feet away. It stares at me for a second and then just charges me. It did not seem at all like it was trying to play, but it also wasn't being harsh or baring teeth. It's running and running directly towards me, and I just stand there frozen, thinking it's about to jump on me and planning how I'd fight it off. But instead, when it's legitimately 2 inches from knocking me over, it shifts to the right, runs behind me, and then jumps back up to where I first saw it. I quickly step up to the path along the rows of graves like it takes me 5 seconds max to get where I should have had a clear view of the dog. But as soon as I look, it's fully disappeared. From my new vantage point, I could see the entire graveyard, and the dog is nowhere. There aren't any holes in the perimeter wall, and it was way too high for it to jump over. There's not a single person around. It could have easily just been a stray dog, but I don't think it's really a breed someone would dump, and it looked like it was well taken care of. The fact that when I looked for it, there was no trace of it, it all just makes me feel weird. It's England, so it just rained and there was muddy spots. There's no paw prints or anything. I wasn't scared in the moment, but I took it as a sign to leave, and as soon as I turned my back, the fear hit me, and all the hair on my arms was standing up, heart beating. I just felt like there was an energy behind me pushing me forward, but it didn't feel malicious. I walked back through the gate, and the road noise came back. I haven't been to that cemetery again. I still drive past it often, but whatever pull I felt before is completely gone. I don't know if this story is even anything paranormal, but either way, it's scary. Sorry it's so long, just wanted to give you all the details. If it wasn't a regular dog, I have no idea what it could have been. Maybe nothing, who knows. I know what it was. That, my friend, was a cemetery guardian. And I found out the hard way that they don't take too kindly to you going into cemeteries and not leaving an offering. I think maybe the offering shows respect and it shows them you're not going to do anything malicious, so they don't really have to keep that hard of an eye on you. But if you don't, they don't know, and maybe you just did something that you wouldn't even think twice about that set off the like alarm bells for them. But that was a cemetery guardian. And there's actually a church in North Carolina that I visited. There's a huge black dog that a lot of people have reported seeing in that cemetery, and it's just widely known that it's a guardian of the cemetery. And when you go there, you got to show respects for it. I actually visited it. There should be a cemetery. There should be a video somewhere on my page where I visited it. It is gorgeous. But anyways, that is all for today. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you next time. And next time is tomorrow. I will see you tomorrow. Bye.